Welcome to the Broncos Podcast with Troy Renck. I am your host, Troy Renck from the Denver Post. Hope you're having a wonderful week, Broncos country. We got news coming up. We got the owners' meetings coming up. More time to talk with Coach Sean Payton. Owner Greg Penner will be there, elaborate on some bigger macro issues. So certainly looking forward to that. And I will be bringing on guest Parker Gabriel from the Denver Post. No one does it better than Parker, so he'll be able to talk to that. What is he thinking about in terms of the needs in free agency? What about the draft? What's left? And again, those owners' meetings, there's always news out of there, how they view certain players, where they think they might fit on this roster, and how they're going to move forward, because there's still some dots to connect for this team. They've had a good offseason. Certainly if those free agents are healthy, where do they go next? What are their priorities? We're going to get to all of that with Parker Gabriel after the break. Have you been injured in a car wreck or hurt at work? What are you waiting for? Give my friends at Hoggatt Injury Law a call. Their motto with us, it's personal. That's because it is. I've known Darby Hoggatt forever. We became good friends. Many of his clients have become his good friend. You don't even have to pay Darby up front. If your case goes as planned, Darby will be the one writing checks to you. Again, if you've been hurt in a car wreck or injured at work, give Darby's team a call. That number, 1-833-HOGGATT. See it on the screen there. That's Darby's place. 1-833-HOGGAT, or visit the website at hoggattlaw.com. BetOnline is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for betting on all the madness. Whether you're a seasoned fan or a first-time bettor, BetOnline is your ultimate game day companion. They're the largest selection of odds on everything from college hoops to a $200,000 bracket contest. BetOnline continues to be your number one sports betting source. From every Cinderella story to every hat trick, BetOnline has you covered with odds, stats, and more for every game, every play, and every win. BetOnline, the game starts here. Welcome back, folks. This is, again, Troy Renck from the Denver Post. You're listening to the Broncos Podcast. Thank you for all your support, Broncos country. And I'm bringing on my good friend, Parker Gabriel from the Denver Post. If you're not reading him, then you're doing it wrong. Parker has you covered with the nuts and bolts, amazing feature stories. And I wanted to bring him on for a number of reasons, because he's great at covering the team for our paper. But we got a news event coming up, Parker, with the owners' meetings. So I want to start there. First, how you doing? I know life's changed a little bit for you. So how's everything in Parker Gabriel's world?
Pretty good. Yeah, last 9 weeks have been a little different. We've got a little guy at home, so it's been awesome. Definitely have learned the Troy Renck way, which is to never sleep more than 3 or 4 hours at a time, which is solid. Good work. You've been doing that for a long time. But no, it's been great. Obviously, big things happening. And then it's like, talk to you before dropping off in January. And it's like, yeah, maybe they might make a couple moves, thing or two might happen, should be pretty quiet. And then I'm watching over the course of a few weeks, and it's like, 3 guys leave for coordinator jobs. Darren Muji gets a general manager job with the Jets. Michael Wilhoit gets a rest, just like on and on and on. And it's sort of like, yeah, that's how it always goes with this team. But I think, you've said this a few times. On the whole, obviously it hasn't been like exclusively good news, and you lose good people. You got to find ways to replace them. But on the whole, it's a team that looks like it's headed in the right direction. And I think that sort of started, more or less it started when Sean Payton got here. But I think for real, the decision to move on from Russell Wilson, you can think of as sort of like a starting point. Right. And all those veterans that left. And from there, they've really done a pretty remarkable job so far. And now it's like, okay, you covered 80% of the road. Now, how are you going to get the last 20% covered?
Yeah, and so now that brings us to the owners' meetings. When you look at what they've done in free agency, the safety, why can't I pronounce his name?
Talanoa Hufanga.
Talanoa Hufanga. I'm going to get this right at some point on this podcast. Apologize, Talanoa. Dre Greenlaw, and certainly Evan Ingram. What's left? What are you looking forward to hearing from Sean Payton? Because part of the reason you go to the owners' meetings is they do these coaches' breakfasts where these coaches sit down with the media. You can bounce from table to table. It's like AFC has one session, the NFC has one, and they go for a little over an hour. They're very informative. It's a much more relaxed setting. It's getting less relaxed because there's just more media showing up, but we'll see. I mean, because it's a longer trip, how many people from the West Coast go to Florida. But what are you looking forward to hearing from Sean Payton? What are some of the questions that you think he may at least hint at? He's not going to give away draft strategy. We understand that, but Are you interested to see how he describes Evan Ingram, the Dre Greenlawn fit, the risks they're taking on injuries, frankly, Parker? What are some of the questions you want answered from Sean Payton?
Yeah, all of that, and then a lot more too. And the nice thing about having an extended period is like you end up, you'll field questions about, Bo Nix going into year 2 and how do you make the leap and some of those. But there ends up always being time for more of the nuts and bolts too. And I'm interested in how they view the running back situation. I wrote about this yesterday at denverpost.com. But are they? I think if they could go into the draft, almost treat it like wide receiver, or in a way, and it's obviously a lot different position, but last year at quarterback, everybody knew they needed a quarterback, right, and everybody thought they would address it both in free agency with a veteran and then in the draft with a rookie. And instead, they didn't like what free agency held. They didn't want to go to a price point with, the Sam Darnolds of the world. And so even though they kicked the tires on a lot of those guys, and then they just drafted their guy and they got it right. So is running back the same way? Like, do they just want one guy to put at the top of that room, or do they feel like they need to overhaul it? Because if they sign J.K. Dobbins and then draft somebody in day 1 or day 2, who shows up to camp from the 4 guys that are on the roster right now feeling like they have a spot on the roster locked down? I would think probably none of them. It's a little different, obviously, if they just draft a guy. Everything from that stuff, roster questions, are they going to get extensions done with John Franklin Myers in addition to, Zach Allen and Cortland Sutton, to he hired a director of game management in Evan Rothstein. I'm interested if he'll shed any light on sort of what he envisions that role looking like. So there's just all sorts of things to get to, and a lot of stuff that's happened since he spoke at the Combine. And so, yeah, it's a great opportunity. And then, we'll see how much he gives us.
Yeah, I mean, the first year he was there, he was just unloading on people, specifically Nate Hackett. So he was so candid, it was alarming and fantastic on both fronts. Last year, a little more guarded. But the thing about Sean Payton, he doesn't really avoid questions. Like, right, he's not a huge fan of the media the way he treats us necessarily. But at the podium, he answers almost every question. Outside of injury stuff, he answers it and usually gives a really good response. And to your point about the running back, our friend Nick Kosmider had something today in The Athletic. You had a great analysis today in the Post. I mean, I've said this on the pod, and it's never personal. I know people think it is now with Javonte. To me, he was the worst starting running back in the league last year. He was a third down back. He should have been Samaje Perine early in the season. He wasn't. He averaged 8 carries a game, the lowest for a starter in the league. 513 yards, the lowest total for a Sean Payton leading rusher in his 17-year career. But to your point, if you bring in Omarion Hampton in the draft, or Trayvon Henderson, or Judkins from Ohio State, who's safe? I mean, does that mean that Estime safe as a short yardage guy? And between Jaleel McLaughlin and Watson, one of them is not going to be on the team. And if you keep expanding Mims's role, what is the role for Jaleel at that point? And I know, looking at the numbers yesterday, Parker, and I know you know this, like, I think Jaleel's longest reception was 11 yards last year. He didn't have a 20. They had like 4 20-yard runs, and one of them was Bo Nix. And where does Tyler Bidet fit in that? Right. I mean, obviously they thought enough of him to activate it, as you wrote about in your story today. They activate him and make Estime a healthy scratch at Buffalo, a guy I've liked. I thought it was going to get an opportunity. Well, you don't make a guy you like a healthy scratch in a playoff game. So it is going to be fascinating to see how that position pans out. What do you think the explanation is? And just in your theory, because you're so, you're educated in this team now. You've been in, boots on the ground for 3-4 years now with this. On the injury risk, is it they balancing Bo Lowry? Are they rolling the dice a little? That guy who was hurt is going to be healthy, the every other year kind of thing you see in baseball with relievers. What do you think? Where does that confidence come from on taking injury risk with their 3 big free agents?
Yeah, I think it's both of those, and then probably a little more too. Obviously, like, Sean Payton is really bullish on the impact that Bo Lowry, and just the way that they've sort of built their strength and conditioning program, their performance program, the resources. This is one of those things, like, when you talk about the way, I think when people think about, okay, what advantage can ownership provide? A lot of people, they understand, or at least a little bit, the sort of like cash cap relationship, right, where it's like, if you have the cash to pay people up front, you can spread it out. Okay, yes, we understand that. you have to pay the piper on the cap eventually anyway. So it still takes smart management no matter how much money your ownership group has. This is the sort of thing where, you can really push the advantage because the Broncos pour a ton of resources. Greg Penner cares a lot about this element of the game. And if you think about it, like if you can avoid 1 or 2 soft tissue injuries that, maybe nobody else avoids or very few other teams avoid, you're not only making it easier on your roster, but that can make a real difference over the course of a season. So I think it's an area where they think they have an advantage there. And I think Sean Payton believes they have an advantage there. But obviously, like, it's still a game in roulette in camp. Like, somebody's going to blow an ACL, someone's going to tear an Achilles, someone's going to break a leg. And the question is whether it's a practice squad guy or whether it's, a main starter. And there's not a lot of way to avoid that. So there's always injury risk. And then, I think, maybe there's some of that, like, well, they've been hurt, maybe they're due for a healthy run. And then the last part of it is just like, you are close here. And some of these things you can't buy on the open market at full health, because if you had that, they wouldn't be on the open market. So, you're just going to roll the dice and see if you can get a healthy run out of some of these guys. And this is part of the benefit now of and it's not even fully this year, but like, you're finally starting to see, you're getting a taste of what the rookie quarterback window looks like. Like, you can take risk on your roster. You can pay guys on your roster when your quarterback is making $3 million a year that you can't when your quarterback makes $50 million a year. And so the Broncos it's not fully that. Like, we'll see a lot more. And then into 26 too, I would imagine, in terms of aggressive, who they're paying, how you pad out a roster. This is sort of the start of that rather than the finish of that. But I think they're deciding this year, let's use some of that flexibility that the rookie quarterback contract gives us to see if we can, hit a couple of darts on the wall here, because these guys are really good players. And if they're on the field, obviously they're going to make a big difference.
Yeah, I believe 2 of the 3 will stay healthy. Just the numbers game of it. Greenlaw came back last year, played the final 2 games. He looked every bit like the player I'd seen before.
Yeah.
He gives them, when healthy, their first sideline to sideline coverage linebacker since Danny Trevathan that I covered in 2015. And Ingram it's beyond obvious how much they need a pass catching tight end, with all due respect to Adam Troutman. And maybe Nate Atkins comes back as a fullback. There was talk, little Jordan Humphrey, I know, was thinking about maybe put on weight and coming back as a tight end. He has since signed with the Giants. But when we look at the remaining needs now, and let's talk first free agency. And I'm joined by Parker Gabriel, and folks, this is the Broncos podcast with Troy Renck. I'm Troy Renck for the Denver Post. You can read my stuff at denverpost.com/sports, and then Broncos, that's where you'll find Parker's stuff as well. But Parker has been on the beat, has done just amazing work. He wins the APSE for top beat writer, and that's for around the country, folks. And he's done it a couple times. Those awards don't happen by accident. Trust me. That just speaks to how good and how detailed his coverage is. But Parker, let's get into first free agency. They found a punter.
Yeah,
I think I maybe they're not done there yet, but that could be. But is there any other? Let's start free agency. Any other needs you expect them to address in free agency before the draft? You mentioned J.K. Dobbins. Maybe they had a running back. Are there any other positions beyond running back that they could try to pluck a high, one of those low risk, high reward guys as they approach the draft? I know how teams are so concerned about covering themselves going into the draft so they don't reveal anything. But any needs that in your mind could be addressed as we, what are we, almost a month away from the draft now?
I think, it's not impossible that they'd find a receiver they like. I just think like the receiver market, by the way, is it's not quite as depressed as the safety market got last year. We saw
Okay.
Justin Simmons as part of that, and then the market moved really slow. It's not quite like that, but there's still a bunch of veteran receivers out there. If there's one who sort of fits your flavor profile, then maybe. I don't think they're in a big rush to do that. And honestly, Troy, like, I think if you see another ad, it could be something that's maybe not in an area that you expect, but they just like the value. It could be a cornerback, for example, where you're just sort of padding out some veteran depth, or maybe it's another, safety or something like that. And so I don't think it's a huge need. Obviously, the fullback thing, like you mentioned, like Mike Burton is still out there. Obviously very familiar with Sean Payton. I'm interested, again, nuts and bolts questions you get to ask at the owners' meetings. you've sort of had this inkling that maybe Nate Adkins can play fullback, as you mentioned.
Right.
Is that really the plan now? Is it, maybe that just they know they can get Burton back, and so they'll do it at some point? Maybe we'll get some light on that. So I don't honestly, like, at this point in free agency, you're not taking huge swings. I can't sit here and say it's just absolutely impossible that, Stephon Diggs or Cooper or one of the bigger name receivers. That would surprise me. And so then I think you're just sort of picking little spots on the roster to fill in a little bit of depth if you're making a move at all between now and the draft.
Yeah, and they're in a good position because, like, last year you look at their roster, when you have no quarterback, everything else, it just feels like, it's kind of panic because, like you said, when you have a quarterback, it's the Revlon that basically covers all the blemishes. If he's functional, he's good, and Bo was good last year, and he wasn't great, but he was good. And if you continue to add weapons around him, that's why I really push back when people say he's reached the ceiling. I'm like, I don't know how you could say that until he has better weapons around him. But you look at what's left in free agency, as Parker mentioned. Maybe they go out and get a receiver. Folks, we've said this on this pod. I told you way back when they were never in on Deebo Samuel. The only way they were going to be in on Kupp is if it was a depressed market where he was 1 year $4 million, 1 year $5 million. He got 15. They weren't in on it. Trust me on that price. Let me ask you real quick before we jump into the draft, Parker. And again, Parker Gabriel from the Denver Post joining the show here. What is the order and the priority of extensions with the players you mentioned with Courtland Sutton, Nick Bonito, Zach Allen, in terms of, obviously the money's different on all three. I think Courtland's obviously the lowest number in terms of a big deal, but what is the priorities? Do you get him done because it could be the easiest, or you got to say, like, hey, we got to get Zach Allen because he's a pillar, he's an anchor? How do you think that plays out over the next few weeks, if not months?
Yeah, I think obviously, like, there's always an order, but I think they're in a good enough position cap wise right now where they don't have to sequence. I mean, last year they had so little cap space to operate with that, like, for example, they had to rework. They had to, and not in a major way, but they had to move money around on Courtland Sutton's deal, literally to have space to extend Pat Surtain, week one. Right. And so had that, and maybe they could have flipped the order with Pat and Quinn Miners, who signed his extension in the summer, but, it went the way it went. Then they had to trade Baron Browning before they could finalize the deal with Jonathan Cooper because they had so little cap space. So they have the flexibility to do it in whatever order they want. I think the way I've sort of broken this up in my mind is Zach Allen and Courtland Sutton, their extensions will provide cap flexibility. Like, they have big cap numbers. When their deals are done, the Broncos will have more cap space for 2025, obviously not long-term, but for 2025 than they do currently. I mean, Court's at 20.2 million cap number, and Zach Allen's, I think, at like almost 19.5. Bonito's a different story because his cap number in the last year of his rookie deal is like 5.5. So that may be cap neutral. It probably will tick up a little bit. It's not going to go to 15 or something like that in the first year of a deal. But to me, it's like the easier ones to get done are the ones that are going to create your cap flexibility. Although obviously you have to agree on a number. Zach Allen is going to get paid a ton of money. I mean, he's 26 years old. He's playing the best football of his career, and defensive tackle. And you saw it, obviously he's a different position than DJ Jones, but that's a premium position in the NFL. And so is Bonito. I mean, we've seen the edge market just explode this offseason. So, if you're talking about paying Zach Allen, obviously probably well north of 20 million. We'll see if he gets into the mid 20s. Bonito, you might be talking about close to 25 million a year. I mean, that is a lot of money. That's a lot of planning that goes into that. And then you've got other candidates like, can they pay everybody? John Franklin Myers is a really, really good player who means a lot to this defense. So they have their work cut out for them. I think, you can't just spend money willy-nilly. You got to be diligent and sort of like putting the puzzle pieces together. But in terms of like their flexibility for 25 and 26, there's nothing really stopping them from sequencing the extensions however they want.
Yeah, and Sutton's an interesting one. Again, I was critical of Sutton for a couple of years when he had 2 touchdowns in 26 games. Last 2 years, he's earned his money. Yep. I do think you have to find a medium ground with him, that you're not paying him, obviously, T. Higgins, Jefferson money. He's not that guy, and age is part of that. But he is hugely important to Bo Nix. He is his third down target. That's why I'm interested to see how this Evan Ingram thing works out, because they were so dependent on Courtland Sutton on 50-50 balls, winning balls on third down.
Yeah.
And now that Ingram's involved, like, can you get Sutton? I would try to get Sutton on a Garrett Bowles type deal, 3-year, whatever that number. I think I've looked at Calvin Ridley got 4-year 92 last year as a free
Yeah.
agent. So maybe you could get him at 3-year 75 with 45 guaranteed. See if he would bite on that. I mean, that's what I would try to do.
But that's three players you're paying an average annual value of $25 million ish a year to between Zach Allen, Nick Bonito, and Cortland Sutton on the deals that they have coming up to try to get done.
And it's interesting with Bonito because obviously you decided he is that guy, and Nick certainly was last year. It's just he's done it 1 year.
Yep.
So you gotta really believe, because he's kind of like your next Von Miller in terms of the way you're going to pay him, not face of the franchise, but did what you see show you that it's like in baseball? Is this guy now going to be a 30, 100, 350 on base, or was that an anomaly? I think Nick's ascending, but that's a huge number with him because he has the leverage of free agency where Cortland's age works a tick against him, and Zach Allen. I just think that if you're going to be a good defense and you've talked about winning at the line of scrimmage, it would seem almost counterintuitive to say, no, we're not going to pay him. Now, John Franklin Myers is obviously vulnerable for the same reason they think they could probably find another John Franklin Myers on the market, and he was such a great addition, he and Malcolm Roach. But as you painted, they're in a good position. There's no desperation here where you got to get stuff done. Last year, they were literally, getting stuff done the last minute to get extensions, cutting every dollar to make it fit. And they're in a much better position now. And they ended up getting a great deal, frankly, on Pat Surtain. If they had waited on that, it would have cost them, another 10, 15 million? I mean,
and that's the cautionary tale with Bonito, right? With the way the market's gone, and if he put 15 more sacks on the board this year, then you're paying him more, than what it would cost to get it done. And that's not like I'm part of but it would cost. You could do the Jamar Chase thing where the price just keeps going up and up and up, and you're looking at it going like, oh shoot, we should have done it 9 months ago. Now what do we do?
Yeah. Now are we going to pay him top dollar, $35 million, highest defense, edge rusher in the league? That's once you let a person get to free agent that last year of free agency, then the other teams start to set the market on you.
Yep.
You could say, well, he's not worth that. Well, it's not your decision anymore.
Right.
And that's the problem teams run into. And bad teams do that, like the Bengals. I love those two receivers, but you could have got that done a year and a half ago or 2 years ago. And Dallas has been doing this where you wait to the last minute. And it's, well, we have the money, we'll pay him. But it's how, as you explain a lot, it's how these puzzle pieces fit. Yes, you can pay him, but do you want to save $10 million? Because that could be 2 players. That could be 3 players. I mean, it's just roster management. Well, Parker, let's swing our attention to the draft. And these will be a lot of questions with Sean Payton beyond running back, but we'll hit running back too, because I want to see who some of your favorites are. But they get into the draft this year. It's first year they've had not a full complement, but certainly feel like they're players in the draft again. First time since the Russell Wilson trade. Sean Payton's been aggressive his first couple of years. Moved up to get Marvin Mims, moved up to get Riley Moss. They've identified starters, contributors. The young and hungry only works if those young players are good. And they've identified some really good young players. He and George Payton deserve credit for that. Part of it is knowing what your coach wants and scouting to that. And George Payton being very diligent of, hey, this is the profile. Let's stay with it. And you're seeing that consistency for me instead of the island of misfit toys. New scout, new opinion. Let's try this year. And now you're starting to see how this vision for guys, vision for year 1, year 2, year 3, you can kind of see what Sean Payton was talking about on that, 2-hour Zoom call he gave his first year about the draft.
The longest pre-draft news conference in history. He called it, I think, after he talked for an hour.
Yeah, this is ridiculous. It's like, I know it's Utah. He was like the Adrian Brody speech. Call it, what was it? The what's his name? The Red. God, I can't think of his name. I'm losing my memory. The host of the Academy Awards said he was coming back as host so he could hear the end of that speech. That was how long that. Yeah, Conan O'Brien. It's like, I'm coming back so I can hear the end of Brody's speech. That's how long that press conference was with Sean Payton. And then he was getting increasingly hostile when he could have stopped it at any minute. It was just so funny. It's like, it's long because you're talking. None of us are talking. We're on mute. But we look at the draft. Let's start at running back because, I mean, you can't find a mock. It's hard to find a mock that doesn't mock the Broncos to take a running back now.
Yeah.
With the belief that Tyler Warren and Colston Loveland are going to be gonzo by 20. Are there running backs you like? Is it Hampton? What do you think their strategy is? We'll start there at running back.
Yeah, I like Hampton. I mean, it's hard not to like a lot of running backs in this
Yeah.
class. Like
Great
Mel
class.
Kiper Jr., obviously ESPN legend, said he had draftable grades on 31 running backs in this class. You know, I'm not Troy, I wouldn't be surprised if there's, 10, 12, 14 starters in this draft. And so there's a lot of guys, and it depends on your flavor. It depends on if you want. Obviously, the Broncos put a premium on pass catching ability. And so, some of the guys like Sean, we've heard the Alvin Kamara origin story.
Yeah.
I don't even know how many times at this point. But one of the things I think that speaks to the draft process from that story that you can take is that they didn't think that they knew he was a good pass catcher. They didn't know he was the home run threat in the run game until the preseason. And then they saw it over and over and over again. They're like, oh, this guy is what we thought he was, plus, plus, plus. And so, like, obviously, if you find that, that's great. There's some guys where it's just like, I'm not a scout. So, like, we haven't seen Caleb Johnson from Iowa. Like, we haven't seen him be super dynamic in the passing game because that's not what he was asked to do at Iowa. He ran a lot of the wide zone stuff at Iowa. Does that mean that he can't be really, really good in by doing it three other ways? No, it doesn't. It just means if you pull up Caleb Johnson highlights, you're just not going to see a ton of that. And if you watch a lot of Iowa tape, you're not going to see a ton of that. So some of it is just projecting. But man, there are so many talented guys in this class. My personal favorite is Travion Henderson from Ohio State. He's a bulldog. He's got home run ability, and Ohio State actually used him in the passing game more than Quinshon Judkins, and kind of in the way it wasn't just screen and dump off. It was wheel routes and angle routes and all this stuff, stuff that looked to me like, oh, Sean Payton likes doing that. And so, is he? But again, is he there at 51? Maybe. Unless somebody else thinks the same thing and takes him at 45. So I think the good news about this class is I think you can have plan A, B, and C in terms of, first round, day 2, or maybe it's it just didn't go the way you thought it was going to go. So you address it on day 3 and still found a good player. But that's not how Sean Payton thinks. Sean's I got 1 or 2 guys and I'm getting them come hell or high water. And that's at the antithetical to how George Payton usually does things. But so far in 2 drafts together, they've done a good job of kind of marrying those techniques up.
Yeah, being one guy pragmatic, the other guy ultra aggressive, and they balanced each other out so far, and it's worked. I mean, you look at their last draft with Troy Franklin. He wasn't great, but he was functional and getting better. Devon Vele was a nice player for them, someone they needed. Year 2 is huge for both those players, frankly. Yep. But you look at Moss, he developed into a really quality starter. He wasn't the same player when he came back from the knee injury, but he's a functional, if beyond serviceable corner. Those are hard to find. You don't want to pay that in free agency. What about tight end then? I've said that, maybe they look at tight end, wait until the 3rd round and take the kid from Heritage, Terrace Ferguson. He would have been there. I don't think, I wrote this column saying, you take you're gambling that he'd be available in the 3rd. You probably have to trade up in the 3rd because he just went off the charts at the combine. The guy had the combine, a legacy combine for his position. But Gunnar Helm has done a visit. He's a local kid from Cherry Creek. Or do you think if Loveland was there, Colston Loveland was there at 20, do they take that, or do they take Eli Arroyo at 50, 51 from Miami? So they got Ingram, but Ingram's an older player. I definitely expect them to back up and get at least one more tight end, right?
Oh, 100%. Yeah. And honestly, Troy, it just wouldn't surprise me still if they took one in the 1st round. Yeah. If I don't, and now you're looking at it and you're saying well, Tyler Warren is probably not going to be there. We've thought that for a while. And now maybe Colston Loveland won't either. You look at the teams that need tight ends in the draft, and if you've got 2 coming off the board in the first 14, maybe you go a different direction in the 1st round. Obviously there's an interesting scenario where all of the 2 tight ends, Warren and Loveland, and the 2 running backs, Genty and Hampton, that we sort of all collectively, is what Sean Payton calls the NFL train, all think of as the 1st round guys. If they're all gone, then what do you do? But to me, I think Colston Loveland's a really good player. I wouldn't have any qualms about taking him at 20 if obviously I think he had a shoulder injury. If that stuff all checks out and if he's sitting there, you signed Evan Engram, okay, you're getting Colston Loveland for 5 years plus. You've got Engram on a 2-year deal. And also So we're afraid of putting like two good players from the same position on the field over the course of 17 plus games. Like that makes no sense to me. So I think they'd be happy if he was there still. And then, if you're going down the line, like I think Elijah Arroyo, as you said, from Miami, Mason Taylor's one to watch from LSU. I mean, these guys, they know everything about LSU players because Jamar Cain worked there. Bo Lowry worked there for a long time. It's right down the road from New Orleans. Like they've always got great information on LSU guys. And I think also Mason Taylor's high school coach now is one of the guys that they've added to the staff this year. So
I saw Mason play in high school. I mean, he's Jason Taylor's son, the Hall of Famer, the edge rusher. I mean, it was just an issue of getting a little bigger. I mean, he's definitely a pro tight end, but continue.
Yeah, and so those two guys. So, like, I think, like, obviously, you never know how the draft's going to go, and pro teams sometimes are generally in line with sort of like the analytical consensus that's out there. Obviously, there's a lot of people that just talk, and then there's a lot of people that do a really good job of evaluating players that are not actually in the league. So, you sort of think like those two guys, in the second round conversation, or do you try to push it to the third round? Like, I still think if they had their druthers and they could address running back and tight end in the first two rounds, that would be great. But, it's a good draft on the defensive line. It's a good draft at a couple other spots. Like you could go a different direction at 20 if you don't like what's there running back and tight end wise.
Yeah, we've seen that Oregon kid pop up defensive line, right?
Yeah, Derek Harmon, yeah.
What's his name?
Derek Harmon.
And he was a transfer from Michigan State, if memory serves right, and he really exploded. He wouldn't be the first guy that went to Oregon and his career revived, as we saw from Bo Nix. So, but it'd be a little bit of a surprise. But like you said, folks, when you hear D-line and you kind of roll your eyes, some of it's how the board falls and the depth at other positions. So if you pass on that and you want that, you're not going to get it in the second or third, you feel like. I mean, that's how this draft works. Like it is literally like a card game at times where some cards are coming back around and another one's not. And so do you feel like you have to make that move? That's where we'll finish here, Parker. Again, Parker Gabriel is joining me from the Denver Post. We both believe, I think, consensus that they're going to take a running back and tight end in this draft. What are some of the other positions Broncos country should be looking at them addressing in the draft, no matter the round, just positions of need you think that they will address in a month now here?
Yeah, I think they'll take a wide receiver at some point. I mean, this isn't a wide receiver class like last year or last couple of years where there's like 5 or 6 first round guys, but that might actually be good for the Broncos if it's like thick in the middle, because you're probably not in a position where you have to take one and that's another position, right, Troy? Where like, if you think Matthew Golden is a true number one or Emeka Egbuka is a true number one, like you could do a lot worse than taking that guy at 20. But you probably have, like, if you have him a half a round graded higher than anybody else on your board, just take him, and put him in that young receiver group and see what happens. It seems more likely it'll be later in the draft. And so you've got that. I mean, I think when you look at what they did at safety, I mean, Hufanga obviously adds depth. And if you think they're going to keep PJ Locke, which they probably will, I mean, he's probably going to have to earn a spot, but you've got 3, and then what after that? We haven't seen that any of those other guys, they've got a bunch, that any of those other guys are really functional from a play perspective outside of special teams. So maybe you're looking for a safety on day 3. I wouldn't be surprised if they had a corner at some point. Obviously, offensive and defensive lines. Like, the thing about the defensive line in the first round, just to revisit that for a second, is that we just talked about John Franklin Myers' deal being up after this year. So it might be a luxury pick this year, but you want to get to a point where you're always filling needs that are a year or so ahead. That's one potentially. Luke Wattenberg, the center, is entering the last year of his deal. They've got 4 expensive offensive linemen. Really hard to have a functional roster with 5 offensive linemen that are all getting paid, near the top of the market. So if you're looking interior offensive line, defensive line, safety, they could add an edge rusher, wide receiver. Like, there's a bunch of ways they could go, and it's good to be in a position where you don't have to say like, okay, we need to find difference makers at 5 different positions with 7 picks.
Yeah, I mean, they're not that team anymore. They're close. And with the right draft, they've said this is not us speaking out of turn. They have a great offseason. I think they're going to threaten the Chiefs. I feel like the Chiefs are going to come back to earth a little bit. I've said this, that the Chiefs were the worst great team I've ever seen in my life in person. Very similar to the San Francisco Giants when they were winning titles. All due respect to what they did. But I never thought they were a great team. They were great on third down, great on fourth down. They were situational, but they live on the edge now. And the Broncos had them beat in Kansas City. They didn't win. And they crushed them with playing against Carson Wentz and a bunch of imposters at the end. But they're close. They're close. Now, have they done it? They have not. But I'm bullish on Bo Nix. I love the Ingram edition. I love the Greenlaw edition. We'll see on the others. But those two editions, you add that with a good draft, with if they find their Kamara in this draft, right? They got a shot, Parker.
100%, 100%. And, you're looking for growth, obviously, from the young receivers too. Right. And so you're just kind of like, you're in that mold where you can sort of, you see the light at the end of the tunnel. If you squint, you can start to see what's actually beyond the end of the tunnel. And that's where it's like, you start playing the game. It still feels to me that there's a little bit of like, if this and if that,
right.
They got to still connect a couple more dots here. But like, if you find a guy on day 2 or day 3 that really fits in that receiver room well and gives you something in addition to the group they have, or if, like you say, if you find that guy at running back, like you're cooking with gas at that point. And, it's going to be the division's just really rugged. I mean, you look at where the Chargers are at, you look at I think the Raiders have quietly sort of had a nice offseason so far this year, like core competency wise. And so, like nothing's easy in this division. Geno Smith and Bo Nix are the slouches in terms of quarterback in the division now. And you've got 4 obviously very accomplished head coaches. So like you could be quite a bit better and still end up similar record wise, but you could also challenge for a division title. So it's finally sort of like spring after the nuclear winter or whatever that's been the last few years, but they've got work to do because 15's still down the road, one time zone over. Like that's the reason why the Chiefs walked the line the way they did this year is because the guy they have at quarterback. Yeah. And, until he starts the decline, which could be 10 years from now, you still have to go through that every year. And so like they've got their work cut out for them, but they're much better equipped to handle it right now. Probably, I mean, certainly they've been at any point that I've covered the team and probably close to like since the last Super Bowl.
Yeah, it's an exciting time. Folks, again, this is Parker Gabriel who's joined me. He covers the team for the Denver Post where I work, obviously, so I'm biased. He and Luca Evans joined the coverage team. Luca is a fantastic writer as well. I encourage you to read all of Parker's stuff. You can follow him on Twitter. I think it's Parker J. Gabriel, right, on Twitter?
Yep.
Follow him on Twitter there to find the latest, the breaking news, the updated features. The Broncos content is year-round. It never stops. The joke was there was never an off-season for Talking Broncos. Then it was there was never a postseason for Talking Broncos. Now it's back to there's never an off-season. It's Broncos all the time. Parker, you're the best. Thank you. Travel safely. Can't wait to see your reports from out in Florida at the owners' meetings.
Yeah, thanks for having me.